The Homey Files. During the 1991 Chicago clown panic, an elementary school teacher discovers that sometimes the most terrifying monsters hide behind real fears. I keep the police reports in a manila folder marked October 1991, tucked beneath a stack of ungraded math tests in my desk drawer. 27 incident reports, each one stamped with the Chicago Police Department's seal, each one documenting another sighting. Of the white van with "Ha-ha" scrawled across its side. The ink has faded to a pale blue over the years, but I can still read every word. Detective Ray Kowalski handed me those files in November of '91, just after the hysteria finally died down. "Thought you might want these," he said, lighting a Marlboro with shaking fingers. "Seeing as how it all started at your school." That's not entirely true, of course. The Homey sightings had been cropping up all over Chicago's south and west side since September. Kids from Kenwood to Austin were coming home with stories about a black man in clown makeup trying to lure them into his van with promises of candy and money. The media had dubbed him Homey the Clown after that character from In Living Color. Damon Wayans with his sock hat and his catchphrase about not playing that game. But Murphy Elementary was where it got personal, where I first saw the mask. I should probably explain why I kept those files all these years, why I still pull them out sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet and my wife Linda's asleep upstairs, why I cross-reference the incident reports with the school's maintenance logs and substitute teacher schedules, looking for patterns that the police missed. The truth is, I never stopped believing there was something real behind all that hysteria, something worse than mass panic, worse than collective delusion. The Chicago PD concluded their investigation by dismissing the whole thing as an outbreak of urban folklore, influenced by the Gacy murders and amplified by television. No credible evidence, they said. No actual crime committed. They were wrong. October 3rd, 1991, I remember the date because it was the same day the Cubs lost to the Pirates in the playoffs, and half my fourth grade class came to school wearing black armbands. I was 34 then, in my 8th year of teaching at Murphy Elementary on the city's south side. The school served mostly working class families, parents who caught the 6 a.m. bus to manufacturing jobs, kids who qualified for free lunch programs, the kind of neighborhood where everyone looked out for each other's children. I was setting up for morning announcements when Shanice Williams burst through my classroom door, her book bag still bouncing against her back. Tears streaked her dark cheeks, and she was breathing so hard I thought she might hyperventilate. "Mr. Johnson," she gasped, "there's a clown man in the parking lot." Now, I'd heard the rumors every teacher in Chicago had by then. Kids all over the city were reporting encounters with a mysterious clown figure, usually near schools, usually involving a white van. The stories were remarkably consistent. A black man in white face makeup, red lips, colorful clothes, trying to entice children with money or candy. Most of the sightings happened on the south side, in neighborhoods that were already on edge from decades of violence and economic decline. But I'd also been teaching long enough to know how quickly children's imaginations could run wild, especially when they were scared. The Gacy murders were still fresh in Chicago's collective memory. Even though he'd been on death row for over a decade, parents whispered about bodies buried under suburban houses. Kids absorbed that fear and transformed it into something they could name and recognize. A clown man in a white van. "Slow down, Shanice," I said, guiding her to a chair. "Tell me exactly what you saw." She wiped her nose with her sleeve. He was by the dumpster behind the cafeteria, wearing a mask that looked all... She searched for the words. All saggy, like it was made of old skin. And he had this white van with writing on the side. "What kind of writing?" It said "haha" in black letters, and when he saw me looking, he waved real slow-like, then got in his van and drove away. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. This wasn't the usual playground gossip or second-hand story passed down from older siblings. Shanice was one of my most reliable students, quiet, observant, not prone to flights of fancy. "Did you tell your mum about this?" I asked. She nodded. She said I probably just saw the janitor taking out trash. But Mr. Johnson, the janitor don't wear no clown mask, and his truck is blue. I walked the perimeter of the school grounds during my lunch break, ostensibly checking for litter, but really looking for signs that someone had been lurking near the building. Behind the cafeteria, next to the dumpster, where Shanice claimed to have seen the figure, I found tire tracks in the mud, fresh ones, from a larger vehicle, not a car, but something like a van or truck. The treads were deep, suggesting the vehicle had idled there for some time. I also found something else, a torn piece of white fabric caught on the chain-link fence, about shoulder height for an adult man. It looked like cotton or canvas, the kind of material you might use to make a cheap costume. That afternoon, I called the police. The desk sergeant took my report, with the weary patience of someone who'd fielded dozens of similar calls that month. "Another Homey sighting," he muttered, and I could hear him typing. "We'll send a patrol car by this evening. Mr. Johnson, in the meantime, just keep the kids inside during recess." But the patrol never came. Or if it did, it was after I'd gone home to my apartment on Racine Avenue, where I lived alone, with my books and my anxieties, and the growing certainty that something was very wrong in my quiet corner of Chicago. I'd been alone since my divorce 2 years earlier. Linda had wanted children, and I'd kept making excuses, kept putting it off. The truth was that I was terrified of bringing a child into a world that contained people like John Wayne Gacy. I'd been 11 when they found the first bodies buried under his house in Norwood Park, and the images from the news coverage had burned themselves into my memory. Investigators in white coveralls, the smell of lime, the parade of missing boys' photographs on the evening news. "You can't protect everyone," Linda had said during our last fight. "Sometimes you have to have faith that the world isn't as terrible as you think it is." But I knew better. I'd seen what happened when adults failed to protect children. I'd read about Gacy's victims, young men most of them, but several who'd been just boys when they disappeared. Robert Pice was 15. Matthew Bowman was younger than some of my students when Gacy killed him. The clown angle made it worse somehow. Gacy had performed as Pogo the Clown at children's parties, hiding his true nature behind face paint and practiced smiles. Now someone else was using that same camouflage, exploiting the city's trauma for his own purposes. The next morning brought 2 more sightings. Kevin Martinez, a 3rd grader from Mrs. Patterson's class, saw the white van parked across the street when his mother dropped him off. He said the driver was wearing one of those Homey masks from the TV, but insisted it looked different somehow. Older, more worn, like it had been handled too much. Then, during afternoon recess, Tamika Jenkins came running in from the playground claiming she'd seen a clown face peering over the fence from the alley. His makeup was all smeared, she told me, clutching my arm with both hands, like he'd been crying white tears. I gathered the children inside early that day and called another meeting with Principal Harrison. Margaret Harrison was a heavy-set woman in her 50s who'd been running Murphy Elementary since before I started teaching there. She had the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who dealt with every conceivable crisis that could befall an urban school, from gang violence to budget cuts to parents who showed up drunk to parent-teacher conferences. But I could see the worry in her eyes as I described the latest incidents. "The district's already sent out a memo," she said, shuffling through papers on her desk. All Chicago schools are supposed to increase security measures. No students outside unsupervised, early dismissal if needed, coordination with local police. What about the parents? Are we telling them what's happening? Margaret hesitated. The official position is that we don't want to cause unnecessary panic. Most of these sightings have turned out to be false alarms or misidentifications. Most? She didn't answer directly. Instead, she handed me a photocopied bulletin from the school district's central office. The header read, "Advisory regarding recent security concerns," and the text was full of bureaucratic language about unsubstantiated reports and media-driven hysteria. But there was one paragraph that caught my attention. While the Chicago Police Department has found no credible evidence of criminal activity related to these incidents, school administrators are advised to document any suspicious persons or vehicles observed near school property. Forward all reports to your district liaison. They're keeping records, I realized. Margaret nodded grimly. Every school in the city. Apparently, we're not the only ones seeing things. That evening, I drove home through streets that felt different than they had a week earlier. Parents were walking their children to and from bus stops, keeping them close, scanning parked cars and empty lots with the hypervigilance of prey animals. Convenience stores had posted handwritten signs. "No loitering, police will be called." The evening news was running daily. Updates on the clown sightings, complete with man-on-the-street interviews and expert commentary about mass hysteria. But the experts were missing something, I thought. They were so focused on debunking the supernatural aspects of the stories. The idea that some malevolent clown entity was stalking Chicago's children, that they weren't looking at the human reality underneath. Someone was using the panic as cover. Someone who understood that in a climate of mass hysteria, individual incidents would be dismissed as part of the larger delusion. I spent most of that night reading everything I could find about the Gacy case. Not the sensationalized accounts from paperback true crime books, but the actual police reports and court transcripts that had been made public after his conviction. What struck me was how methodical Gacy had been, how carefully he'd selected his victims and maintained his public facade. He'd been a Democratic precinct captain, active in community organizations, well regarded by his neighbors. The clown performances weren't random acts of twisted creativity. They were reconnaissance, a way to get close to children and evaluate potential targets. Was that what we were dealing with now? Someone using the citywide panic to scout victims, to test security measures at different schools, to see which children walked home alone and which neighborhoods had the least police presence? I made a list of all the Murphy Elementary students who'd reported sightings, along with their addresses and family situations. Shanice Williams lived with her grandmother in a 3-flat on Ashland. Kevin Martinez was being raised by a single mother who worked double shifts at a meatpacking plant. Tamika Jenkins was one of 4 children, in a household where both parents worked and the older siblings were responsible for walking the younger ones to and from school. Vulnerable kids whose disappearances might not be immediately noticed, or whose families might assume they'd run away or gotten into trouble. The kind of victims Gacy had preferred. Young people from unstable backgrounds, kids whose absences wouldn't trigger immediate police investigations. October 8th, 1991, 5 days after Shanice's first sighting, and the city was in full panic mode. The Chicago Tribune ran a front-page story headlined, "McClown sightings terrorize school children," with a sidebar comparing the incidents to the Salem witch trials. WGN Television interviewed child psychologists and urban folklore experts. Mayor Daley held a press conference promising increased police patrols around schools. But at Murphy Elementary, things had gotten worse. The white van had been spotted 3 more times that week, always in locations where it could observe the school without being easily seen from the building, the parking lot of a defunct gas station across the street, the alley behind the row of houses that backed up to our playground, the loading dock of a warehouse 2 blocks away. Each time, witnesses described the same details. "Ha-ha," written in black paint or marker. A driver wearing what appeared to be a clown mask. What bothered me most was the progression. The masks were different each time, according to the kids. Shanice's saggy mask had been followed by Kevin's TV Homey mask. Then Tamika's smeared makeup version. Now Marcus Thompson, a usually shy 4th grader, was describing something that sounded even more disturbing. It wasn't like a regular mask, he told me during Thursday morning recess, when he'd refused to go outside with the other children. It was like the face was melting off, all droopy and weird. "When did you see this, Marcus?" "Yesterday, when I was waiting for my mom to pick me up." The van was parked where the ice cream truck usually stops, and the clown man was just sitting there watching the school. But when he saw me looking back, he held up this sign. My blood went cold. Or what kind of sign? A piece of cardboard with numbers on it, like a phone number or something. Marcus scrunched up his face, trying to remember. "I think it started with 773. That was a Chicago area code. The bastard was actively trying to communicate with the children now, not just observe them. This had moved beyond reconnaissance into solicitation. I called the police again, this time asking specifically for Detective Kowalski, whose name I'd gotten from Margaret Harrison. Ray Kowalski had been assigned to coordinate the citywide investigation into the clown sightings, and according to the principal, he was one of the few cops taking the reports seriously. "Mr. Johnson," Kowalski said when he arrived at the school that afternoon, "I've got to be honest with you. We're getting 50 calls a day about this Homey character. Most of them turn out to be kids seeing things, or adults letting their imaginations run wild. The few times we've actually caught up with someone in a clown costume, it's been teenagers playing pranks." "This isn't a prank," I insisted. "Someone is systematically observing this school and trying to make contact with specific students. That's predatory behavior, not hysteria." Kowalski was a thin man in his 40s with nicotine-stained fingers and the tired eyes of someone who'd seen too much urban decay. He lit a cigarette and leaned against his unmarked car while I walked him through my documentation. The timeline of sightings, the descriptions of the different masks, the escalation from passive observation to active solicitation. "You keep good records," he admitted. "Most people just call us screaming about killer clowns and expect us to make arrests based on their kids' nightmares. So you'll investigate. I'll file a report. But Mr. Johnson, you need to understand something about mass hysteria. Once it gets started, it feeds on itself. Kids hear other kids talking about clown sightings, so they start looking for clowns everywhere. They see a maintenance worker in coveralls and think it's a costume. They see a van with company logos and think they read "haha" instead of Acme Plumbing or whatever. What about the phone number? Marcus saw someone holding up a sign with numbers. Kowalski flicked his cigarette into the street. Did Marcus write down those numbers? Did anyone else see this sign? Because without corroboration, it's just one scared kid's story. I wanted to argue, but I knew he was right about the evidence. Everything I had was circumstantial. Tire tracks that could belong to any delivery truck. Fabric that could have blown off someone's laundry line. Children's testimony that could be influenced by suggestion and fear. But that night, when I was grading papers at my kitchen table, my phone rang. Mr. Johnson? The voice was muffled, distorted, like someone speaking through a mask or cloth. This is Homey. I nearly dropped the receiver. Who is this? You've been asking a lot of questions about my visits to your school. I thought maybe we should talk. My hand was shaking as I reached for the pen and paper I kept next to the phone. What do you want? I want you to stop interfering. Tell the children to stop talking to the police. Tell them Homey doesn't like tattletales. The line went dead. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my living room with all the lights on, periodically checking the locks on my doors and windows, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The caller had known my name, had known I'd been documenting the incidents at school. That suggested either inside information or careful surveillance. But more disturbing was the voice itself. Not the theatrical rasp I'd expected from someone playing a character, but something deeper and more controlled. Whoever was behind this wasn't a prankster or a mentally ill individual acting out fantasies. This was someone methodical, someone who'd been watching and planning. I called Detective Kowalski's number at 6 a.m., knowing he'd probably be heading into work. When he answered, I could hear traffic in the background and the sound of a car radio. Jesus, Johnson, you sound like hell. What happened? I told him about the phone call, reading verbatim from the notes I'd scribbled during the conversation. Kowalski was quiet for a long moment. Did you recognize the voice? Anyone you might know personally? No, it was disguised somehow. But Ray, this proves there's a real person behind the sightings. Someone who's been monitoring our response. Maybe. Or maybe someone read about your school in the news and decided to mess with you. We've had copycat calls before. People pretending to be the clown, claiming responsibility for various incidents. My school hasn't been in the news. Another pause. Are you sure about that? I wasn't, actually. The media coverage had been so extensive, and I'd been so focused on the incidents themselves that I hadn't been tracking every story. It was possible that Murphy Elementary had been mentioned in one of the Tribune articles or television reports. Look, Kowalski continued, I'll put a tap on your phone and increase patrols around your school, but I need you to do something for me. I need you to stop playing detective. If this is a real predator, the worst thing you can do is spook him into changing his methods or escalating his behavior. What if he contacts the children directly? Then we'll get him. But until then, just document what you see and let us handle the investigation. I agreed, but I had no intention of backing down. If anything, the phone call had convinced me that we were dealing with someone genuinely dangerous, someone who saw the children at my school as potential victims. The fact that he'd reached out to me directly suggested I was getting close to something he didn't want exposed. October 12th, 1991, the white van appeared in the Murphy Elementary parking lot during morning drop-off, bold as brass, parked in a visitor's space like it belonged there. I saw it through my classroom window while I was writing the day's math. Problems on the blackboard, battered Ford Econoline with Illinois plates, and the familiar haha scrawled across the side panel in what looked like black spray paint. I told my students to continue working on their morning assignments and slipped out into the hallway. The main office had a direct view of the parking lot, and I found Margaret Harrison already on the phone with 911, her voice tight with controlled panic. It's here right now, she was saying. White van, just like the reports. I can see someone in the driver's seat, but I can't make out. Oh my God. Through the office windows, we watched a figure climb out of the van's driver's side door. He was wearing dark clothing, jeans, and a hoodie, and his face was covered by what appeared to be a Halloween mask, but not the cheap, plastic kind you'd buy at a Woolworths. This looked handmade, crafted from fabric or leather, with exaggerated features that seemed to shift and distort in the morning light. The figure stood beside the van for perhaps 30 seconds, turning his head slowly to survey the school building. Even from a distance, I could feel him looking directly at the office windows, directly at us. Then he raised his right hand in what might have been a wave or a gesture of acknowledgement. "The police are on their way," Margaret whispered. But her words seemed to carry across the parking lot, because the figure immediately climbed back into the van and drove away, tires squealing against asphalt. By the time the first patrol car arrived, the van was gone, but it had left evidence this time. Tire tracks, oil stains, and something else that made my skin crawl. A child's backpack, deliberately placed next to where the van had been parked. The backpack belonged to Shanice Williams. "I left it in my mom's car yesterday," Shanice explained when Officer Martinez showed it to her. "We were running late this morning, so I grabbed my books and ran into school. I didn't even notice it was missing." "Where was your mom's car parked?" Kowalski asked. He'd arrived at the school within an hour of the incident, along with 2 other detectives and a crime scene technician who photographed everything from multiple angles. "On Ashland Avenue, in front of our building. We always park there at night." Kowalski exchanged glances with his partner. "Someone took this from your mother's car, Shanice. That means they know where you live, and they've been in your neighborhood." The implications were terrifying. This wasn't random targeting or opportunistic behavior. Someone had been conducting surveillance on individual students, learning their routines, accessing their personal property. The backpack was a message. "I know who you are. I know where you live. I can get close to you whenever I want. We're going to assign a patrol car to monitor your home." Kowalski told Shanice's grandmother when she arrived at the school, "And I want you to vary your routine as much as possible. Different routes to and from school, different pickup times if you can manage it." But I could see the resignation in the old woman's eyes. She worked 2 jobs to support herself and her granddaughter, and she depended on public transportation and fixed schedules. There was only so much flexibility available to people, living on the margins of the city's economy. That afternoon, after the police had finished their investigation and the children had been dismissed early, I stayed behind to help Margaret draft a letter to parents. The district had finally authorized us to provide specific details about the security situation, including descriptions of the suspicious vehicle and recommendations for enhanced precautions. 27 years I've been doing this job, Margaret said, staring at her computer screen. I've dealt with gang violence, drug dealers, budget cuts that eliminated half our programs, but I've never felt like we were under siege before. It's working, I realized. The fear is what he wants. He's not just hunting individual children. He's terrorizing an entire community. Like Gacy, I'd been thinking about the parallels all week. Gacy's victims had come primarily from Chicago's marginalized communities, young men who were gay, poor, estranged from their families, people whose disappearances wouldn't generate immediate media attention or massive police investigations. The current situation was different in scale, but similar in targeting. An urban school serving predominantly low-income families, children whose parents worked multiple jobs and relied on older siblings or neighbors for supervision. Gacy used his clown performances to get close to potential victims, I said. But this is more sophisticated. Instead of approaching children directly, he's using mass hysteria to study police response times, security measures, family routines. He's mapping our vulnerabilities. Margaret saved the document and turned away from the computer. So what do we do? Before I could answer, the school's main phone line rang. Margaret reached for it automatically, then hesitated. Let the machine get it, I suggested. We listened to the automated greeting, followed by a familiar muffled voice. This is Homey. I left a present for one of your students today. But that's just the beginning. Tomorrow I'm going to leave something special for Mr. Johnson." The something special turned out to be a manila envelope taped to the inside of my car windshield when I came out to the parking lot that evening. Someone had broken into my Honda Civic. No, not broken in, because there was no sign of forced entry. They'd used a key or picked the lock with professional skill. Inside the envelope were photographs, black and white surveillance shots of me leaving my apartment building, buying groceries at the Jewel Osco on 95th Street, grading papers at the corner table in Pepe's Diner on Western Avenue. The images were taken from various distances and angles, suggesting multiple observation sessions over several days or weeks. At the bottom of the stack was a handwritten note on white paper. "You have something I want. Meet me at the old Biograph Theatre on Lincoln. The Avenue tonight at 11 p.m. Come alone, or the children start disappearing." My hands were shaking as I drove home, checking my rearview mirror every few blocks to see if I was being followed. The Biograph Theatre had been closed for renovation since early summer, its marquee dark and its entrance boarded up. It was also the site where John Dillinger had been gunned down by federal agents in 1934, a piece of Chicago criminal history that someone with a taste for theatrical gestures might find symbolically appealing. I called Kowalski from my apartment and told him about the envelope and the photographs. "Don't even think about going to that meeting," he said immediately. "This is either a trap or someone trying to draw police resources away from the schools. Either way, we handle it. What if he's serious about the children? Then we'll catch him before he has a chance to hurt anyone. But Johnson, you need to understand that if you go to this meeting, you're not helping anyone. You're just giving a potential predator exactly what he wants, an isolated target and a chance to escalate." Kowalski was right, of course, but that night I found myself driving past the Biograph Theatre anyway, cruising Lincoln Avenue at 10:45 p.m. with my car windows down and my radio turned low. I parked across the street from the theatre and watched the empty sidewalks, looking for any sign of movement or surveillance. At exactly 11 p.m., a figure emerged from the shadows between two buildings half a block south of the theatre. He was wearing the same dark hoodie I'd seen in the school parking lot, and his face was hidden behind another mask, this one white and featureless, like something from a medical supply catalogue. He stood under a streetlight for several minutes, turning his head left and right as if scanning for observers, then walked deliberately to the theatre's boarded entrance and disappeared behind the plywood covering. I waited another 10 minutes, then drove home and called Kowalski again. He was there. Someone was definitely there. "Did you see a van? License plates? Anything useful?" "Just a figure in dark clothing." "But Ray, this means he's serious. He's not just making threats. It means he's escalating, which is what predators do when they feel pressured. That's why I've got undercover officers stationed around all the South Side schools now. If this guy makes a move, we'll be ready." But the next morning brought news that made me realize how wrong we'd all been about the scope of the threat. October 14th, 1991, 3 children were reported missing from schools across Chicago's South Side. Maria Santos from Dewey Elementary, Deshaun Washington from King Elementary, and Keisha Brown from Carver Elementary. All 3 had been walking home from school with friends or siblings. All 3 had simply vanished, somewhere between the school building and their front doors. The police response was immediate and massive. Every available detective was assigned to the case. Patrol cars flooded the affected neighborhoods, and the FBI was contacted about possible federal involvement. But the children were gone, and despite hundreds of interviews and a citywide search, no one had seen anything suspicious. No white van, no figure in a clown mask, No obvious signs of struggle or abduction. "It's not random," Kowalski told me when he called that afternoon. His voice sounded hollow, exhausted. All 3 schools had reported clown sightings in the past week. All 3 kids fit the same demographic profile as your students at Murphy. What about the masks? The van? We found a pile of burned latex and fabric in an alley behind King Elementary. Looks like someone destroyed evidence in a hurry. But Johnson, here's the thing that's really bothering me. We've been watching those schools. We had extra patrols, plainclothes officers, the whole 9 yards. And this guy still managed to take 3 children without being seen. I felt sick. All our precautions, all our documentation and investigation had been irrelevant. While we'd been focused on the theatrical aspects of the clown sightings, someone had been conducting a much more sophisticated operation. The masks and the van had been misdirection, a way to focus attention on obvious suspects while the real predator operated invisibly. What do we do now? We find those kids, and we figure out how someone managed to snatch them from under our noses. That evening, I drove through the neighborhoods around the 3 affected schools, looking for anything the police might have missed. King Elementary was only 6 blocks from Murphy, and Carver was even closer. If the same person was responsible for all 3 disappearances, he was operating in a very concentrated geographic area. What I found was a community in the grip of genuine terror. Parents were escorting children to and from school in groups. Local businesses had organized volunteer patrols, and several churches had opened their doors as safe havens for kids who couldn't go home to empty houses. The clown sightings had stopped completely. No more reports of white vans or masked figures, but that only made the situation more frightening. The threat had become invisible, omnipresent. I was driving north on Ashland Avenue, past the 3 flat where Shanice Williams lived with her grandmother, when I noticed something that made me pull over and kill my engine. In the alley behind the building, barely visible in the dim glow of a streetlight, was a white panel van. Not the Ford Econoline from the school parking lot, but a newer Chevy with no markings on the sides. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, watching the van and trying to decide what to do. It could be completely innocent. A delivery truck, a contractor's vehicle, someone visiting one of the apartment buildings. But the timing and location felt wrong. This was exactly the kind of surveillance position someone would choose if they were planning to take Shanice. Finally, I got out of my car and walked quietly toward the alley. The van appeared to be empty, but as I got closer, I could see that the rear doors were slightly ajar. Inside, barely visible in the darkness, were shapes that looked like equipment. Cameras, perhaps, or other surveillance gear. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. "Mr. Johnson." I turned around to find a man in his 30s wearing a Chicago police department uniform. He was tall and thin with pale skin and dark hair, and he was smiling in a way that made my stomach clench. "Officer," I glanced at his name tag. Patterson. "Are you investigating the van?" In a manner of speaking. His smile widened, and I noticed that his teeth were too white, too perfect. "Actually, I was hoping to run into you. We have some mutual friends." I started to back away, but he was already reaching for something on his utility belt. Not his gun or his radio, but what looked like a small canister. "The children you've been so worried about, Maria, Deshawn, Keisha, they're safe, for now, but they'd like to see you." The canister hissed, and suddenly the air was full of something sweet and cloying. My vision blurred, my knees buckled, and the last thing I remember was Patterson's too perfect smile and the sound of the van's rear doors opening. I woke up in darkness, lying on a concrete floor that smelled of motor oil and old garbage. My head was pounding, and when I tried to sit up, I discovered that my hands were zip-tied behind my back and my ankles were bound with what felt like rope. "He's awake," a voice said from somewhere to my left. Not the muffled, theatrical voice from the phone calls, but something flat and matter-of-fact. "Turn on the light." A bare bulb hanging from the ceiling flickered to life, revealing what appeared to be an abandoned garage or warehouse. The walls were concrete block, stained with decades of automotive fluids and urban decay. In one corner, I could see 3 sleeping bags and several empty food containers. In another corner, surveillance equipment was set up on a folding table, cameras with telephoto lenses, radio scanners, maps of Chicago's South Side marked with red pins. And in the center of the room, sitting on metal folding chairs with their hands and feet bound like mine, were Maria Santos, Deshaun Washington, and Keisha Brown. All 3 children were alive and appeared unharmed, though their eyes held the hollow look of profound shock. Maria was still wearing her dewy elementary uniform, now wrinkled and stained. Deshaun had a bruise on his left cheek. Keisha was clutching a tattered stuffed animal that someone had apparently allowed her to keep. "Welcome to my workshop," the voice continued, and I turned to see the fake Officer Patterson emerging from the shadows near the surveillance equipment. He was no longer wearing a police uniform, but had changed into jeans and a black t-shirt. "I have to admit, you've been more persistent than I expected." Most teachers would have stopped asking questions after the first phone call. "Who are you? Names aren't really important. What matters is that I've been studying your school, your students, your community, for several months now. The clown sightings were just a way to test your security responses and identify the most vulnerable targets." He gestured toward the children. These 3 fit the profile perfectly. Single-parent households, working-class families, minimal supervision during after-school hours. The kind of kids who can disappear without generating too much investigative attention. "The police are looking for them. The FBI is involved." Patterson laughed. "The police are looking for a killer. Clown driving a white van with haha painted on the side. They're chasing a fantasy while the real work happens in plain sight." He walked over to the surveillance equipment and picked up a police radio. "Unit 1247 to dispatch," he said in a professional tone that perfectly mimicked a legitimate officer. "I'm going to be code 7 for lunch. Everything quiet in my sector." The radio crackled back. "Copy that, 1247. Enjoy your break." "Stolen identity," Patterson explained. Real Officer Patterson died in a traffic accident 6 months ago, but his radio codes are still active in the system. Amazing how easy it is to move around the city when people think you're a cop. I looked at the children, trying to communicate some kind of reassurance with my eyes, but they seemed to be retreating deeper into themselves. This was exactly the kind of trauma that would mark them for life. Assuming they survived long enough to be marked by anything. "What do you want?" I asked. "I want you to understand something about predators. Mr. Johnson, we don't always look like monsters. Sometimes we look like helpful community members, concerned citizens, people in positions of trust and authority." John Wayne Gacy understood this. He knew that the best way to access victims was to become someone people respected and relied upon. Patterson walked over to Maria and placed his hand on her shoulder. She flinched but didn't pull away, and I could see the calculation in her 8-year-old mind. Cooperate and maybe survive. Resist and definitely suffer. "These children are going to disappear," Patterson continued, "but not in the way people expect. Not as victims of a clown killer or a serial predator. They're going to become runaways, troubled kids from broken homes who couldn't handle the pressures of urban life. The kind of children who fall through the cracks every day in cities like Chicago. The police won't buy that story. The police will buy whatever story makes their lives easier. 3 missing children require massive investigations, federal involvement, media scrutiny. 3 runaways just need paperwork and a few follow-up interviews." He was probably right, I realized. In a city already struggling with gang violence, drug trafficking, and economic collapse, the disappearance of 3 children from low-income families might generate headlines for a week, then fade into the background noise of urban decay. But you, Patterson said, turning back to me, you're a different kind of problem. You've been asking too many questions, taking too many notes, making too many connections. Even if these children disappear quietly, you'll keep investigating. You'll keep pushing the police to look deeper. So you're going to kill me, eventually. But first, you're going to help me send a message to anyone else who might be inclined to play detective. Patterson left the garage sometime after midnight, promising to return in the morning with supplies for the next phase. The children and I were alone, in the dim light of the single bulb, listening to the distant sounds of traffic and trying not to think about what the next phase might involve. "Mr. Johnson," Maria whispered once we were sure Patterson was gone, "are we going to die?" I wanted to lie to her, to offer some false reassurance that help was coming and everything would be fine. But these children had already been through too much deception. They deserved the truth, or at least as much truth as I could give them. "I don't know," I said, "but I know that police officers are looking for you. Real police officers, not like the man who brought us here. And I know that people care about you, your families, your teachers, your friends." "My mom doesn't even know I'm gone yet," Deshawn said. His voice was steady, but I could see tears on his cheeks. "She works the night shift at the hospital. She won't be home until morning." That was part of Patterson's calculation, I realized. He'd taken children whose absences wouldn't be noticed immediately, giving him time to move them, to establish his story, to create the illusion that they'd disappeared voluntarily. "What about the clown man?" Keisha asked. "The one with the masks and the van?" "I think that was him too," I said. "He was pretending to be different people, to confuse everyone." But why clowns? That was the question that had been bothering me since this whole nightmare began. Why had Patterson chosen to exploit the specific urban legend of Homey the Clown? What was it about that particular figure that served his purposes? Then I remembered something. Detective Kowalski had mentioned during one of our conversations the 1991 clown sightings weren't the first time Chicago had experienced this kind of mass hysteria. Similar incidents had been reported in cities across America dating back to the early 1980s. Boston, Pittsburgh, Kansas City, Denver, all had experienced outbreaks of clown-related panic among schoolchildren. He's done this before, I realized out loud. In other cities with other children. The implications were staggering. If Patterson was part of some kind of organized network, or if he'd been perfecting his methods over multiple incidents across different jurisdictions, then Maria, Deshawn, and Keisha weren't his first victims. They were just the latest in a series that might stretch back years. "We have to get out of here," I said, testing the zip ties around my wrists. They were tight enough to cut off circulation, but maybe if I could find something sharp enough to cut through the plastic. That's when I heard the sound of a vehicle pulling up outside the garage. Heavy engine, probably a truck or van. Patterson was returning much sooner than expected. "Pretend to be asleep," I whispered to the children. "Don't let him know we were talking." The garage door rolled up with a mechanical screech, and Patterson drove the white panel van directly into the building. But he wasn't alone. A second figure climbed out of the passenger seat. A woman in her 40s with short, blonde hair and the kind of forgettable features that would never stand out in a crowd. "Any problems?" she asked Patterson, in a voice that carried the flat vowels of a Midwest accent. "No problems. The teacher's been quiet, and the kids are scared enough to stay cooperative." The woman walked over to examine us like we were merchandise. She prodded Maria with the toe of her boot, checking to see if she was really asleep, then did the same to Deshawn and Keisha. When she got to me, she crouched down and stared directly into my face. "This one's awake," she said. "I know. Johnson, meet my partner. She's been handling the logistics while I dealt with surveillance and acquisition." "Acquisition," I said. "Is that what you call kidnapping children?" The woman smiled, and her expression was somehow more chilling than Patterson's theatrical menace. "We prefer to think of it as talent scouting. There are people who pay very well for healthy, intelligent children from stable backgrounds, especially children who won't be missed right away. Human trafficking, of course. The elaborate setup with the clown sightings and the fake police. Officer wasn't just about abducting children. It was about acquiring inventory for some kind of organized exploitation network. The buyers don't care about the clown hysteria," Patterson explained, "but it's been useful for identifying security weaknesses and potential targets. Plus, if any of these children are ever recovered, their stories about killer clowns en masse. Hysteria will be dismissed as trauma-induced fantasy." "What about the other cities?" I asked. "Boston, Pittsburgh, Denver. Was that you too?" Patterson and his partner exchanged glances. "You really have been doing your homework, haven't you, Mr. Johnson?" "Yes, we've worked in several markets over the past decade. The clown angle is particularly effective because it taps into existing cultural anxieties. People are already afraid of clowns because of Gacy, so when children start reporting sightings, the adult's first instinct is panic rather than rational investigation. But Chicago's different," the woman added. "Bigger market, more potential inventory, better transportation infrastructure for moving merchandise. We decided to establish a more permanent operation here." She opened the van's rear doors and began unloading equipment. More surveillance gear, several large duffel bags, and something that made my blood go cold. A collection of children's clothing in various sizes, all clean and neatly folded. "These are for tomorrow," she explained, noticing my attention. "Fresh clothes, no identifying marks. Part of the preparation process." "Preparation for what?" "For delivery," Patterson said. "The buyers prefer their acquisitions to look healthy and well cared for. Creates the impression that they're getting quality merchandise rather than street kids or runaways." I felt rage building in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. Getting angry wouldn't help the children, and it might provoke Patterson into accelerating his timeline. I needed to find a way to communicate with the outside world, or at least delay whatever was going to happen next. "The police know about the surveillance equipment," I said. "They found the burned masks behind King Elementary. They're going to start looking for someone with technical expertise." "Maybe," the woman said, "but they're looking for a killer clown, remember? Not a couple of entrepreneurs with a mobile, operation and professional grade equipment." She was right, and we all knew it. The Chicago Police Department was conducting a massive investigation based on the wrong assumptions about both the perpetrator and the crime. They were looking for a lone psychopath when they should have been hunting an organized network. They were treating this as a local phenomenon when it was apparently part of a much larger pattern. "Besides," Patterson added, "by the time they figure out what's really happening, we'll be long gone, and these children will be in new homes with their new families." New families was a euphemism so grotesque that I had to bite my tongue to keep from screaming. But the children heard it too, and I could see the understanding dawning in their eyes. Keisha started to cry silently, tears running down her cheeks while she tried to maintain the pretense of sleep. Maria's whole body was trembling. Deshawn was staring at the concrete floor with the 1,000-yard stare of someone whose mind has retreated to a safer place. "When?" I asked. "Tomorrow night," the woman said. "We've got a delivery scheduled for Tuesday morning, which means we need to have them cleaned up and ready for transport by Monday evening." less than 24 hours. After that, Maria Santos, Deshaun Washington, and Keisha Brown would disappear into whatever network Patterson and his partner had established, and the Chicago Police Department would spend months chasing the ghost of a killer clown who had never really existed, unless I could find a way to stop it. They left us alone again around 3 a.m., but this time they'd added additional restraints, leg irons chained to eye bolts in the concrete floor, making it impossible for any of us to move more than a few feet in any direction. The woman had also installed what appeared to be a motion detector near the garage door, connected to some kind of alarm system that would alert them if we tried to escape. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated the resourcefulness of an elementary school teacher who'd spent 8 years dealing with every conceivable classroom crisis. "Maria," I whispered once I was sure they were gone, "do you remember that origami unit we did in art class last month?" She nodded, still crying but paying attention. "I need you to help me with something. Can you reach the pocket of my jacket?" It took several minutes of careful maneuvering, but Maria was eventually able to extract the small Swiss Army knife I always carried, a habit left over from my Boy Scout days that I'd maintained mostly for opening packages and tightening loose screws around the school. "Now I'm going to show you how to cut zip ties," I said. "But you have to be very quiet and very careful." Working with the tiny blade was awkward, with my hands bound behind my back. But I'd practiced this technique once during a first aid course that covered emergency situations. The key was to position the blade against the locking mechanism rather than trying to saw through the entire tie. It took nearly an hour, but I finally felt the plastic snap free. My hands were numb from restricted circulation, but I could move them again. "Mr. Johnson," Deshaun whispered, "what about the alarm thing?" I'd been thinking about that problem since Patterson's partner had installed the motion detector. The device appeared to be focused on the main garage door, probably designed to trigger if someone tried to raise it or break through it. But most industrial buildings had secondary exits, fire doors, loading docks, windows that might not be monitored. Moving as quietly as possible, I began exploring the garage's perimeter. The building was larger than I'd initially realized, with several rooms that had apparently been used for storage or office space. Most were empty now, but one contained something that made my heart race. An old rotary telephone, probably left behind when the previous tenants moved out. The phone was dead, no dial tone, no connection to the outside world. But next to it, running along the wall, was a telephone cable that disappeared through a hole in the concrete block. If I could follow that cable to its source, I might be able to find a working connection. The cable led me to what had once been the building's main office, now stripped of everything except a metal desk and a few broken chairs. But in one corner, barely visible behind a pile of debris, was a junction box where multiple phone lines came together, and one of those lines was still active. I could hear the dial tone humming faintly through the wires. The problem was that the active line wasn't connected to a phone. It was just a bare wire running from the junction box to nowhere, probably left over from some incomplete renovation project. But if I could somehow jury-rig a connection, I remembered something from my college physics classes about electromagnetic induction. If I could create a simple electromagnet using the telephone wire and some kind of metallic object, I might be able to induce enough current in a nearby phone line to complete a call. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot we had. Using the Swiss Army knife, I carefully stripped insulation from the active telephone wire, then wrapped the bare copper around a metal ballpoint pen I found in the desk drawer. The makeshift electromagnet wasn't much, but when I held it near the dead telephone and tapped out the rhythm of a phone number, I could hear faint clicking sounds in the receiver. It took dozens of attempts, But eventually I managed to establish a connection to Detective Kowalski's direct line. The signal was weak and full of static, but I could hear his voice when he answered. Kowalski, Ray, this is Marcus Johnson. I don't have much time, and this connection is terrible, so listen carefully. Jesus, Johnson, where are you? We've been looking for you since yesterday. I gave him the most complete description I could of the building's location, based on what I'd been able to observe during the drive here and the sounds of traffic I'd been hearing. Industrial area, probably near the Dan Ryan Expressway. Large warehouse or garage with multiple vehicle bays. The missing children are here with me, I continued. Maria Santos, Deshaun Washington, Keisha Brown. They're alive, but they're going to be moved tomorrow night. Who's holding you? 2 people. A man calling himself Officer Patterson. He's been impersonating a Chicago police officer, and a woman, probably in her 40s, blonde hair. Ray, this isn't just about Chicago. They've been doing this in other cities. It's human trafficking disguised as mass hysteria. The connection was getting weaker, and I could hear Kowalski's voice fading in and out. Can you hold location until backup? I'll try, I said, but I wasn't sure he could hear me anymore. The line went dead. I'd managed to get a message out, but I had no idea if Kowalski had received enough information to find us. And even if he had, Patterson and his partner would be back soon. If they discovered that I'd contacted the police, they'd either kill us immediately or accelerate their timeline. For moving the children, I needed to buy time, and I needed to make sure that when the police arrived, they'd find evidence that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. I spent the rest of the night setting up what I hoped would be an unambiguous crime scene. Using the Swiss Army knife, I carved identifying information into the concrete walls. The children's names, the date, Patterson's description, everything I could think of that might help investigators understand what had really happened here. I also documented everything I could remember about Patterson's operation, the fake police identity, the surveillance equipment, the mentions of other cities and previous victims. If I didn't survive this, at least there would be a record for whoever found us. But my most important task was preparing the children for what might happen next. I cut their restraints and showed them the building's layout, identifying potential hiding places and escape routes. If shooting started, or if Patterson decided to eliminate witnesses, I wanted them to have every possible advantage. If the police come, I told them, get down on the floor and stay down. Don't run toward the sounds of fighting, even if you think it's safe. Wait until someone in a real police uniform calls your name. And even then, ask them to show you their badge before you come out. What about you, Mr. Johnson? Keisha asked. I'm going to make sure you get home safely. It wasn't exactly a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. If Patterson and his partner returned before the police arrived, I was going to do everything in my power to prevent them from taking the children, even if it meant sacrificing myself in the process. Dawn was breaking through the dirty windows when I heard the sound of vehicles approaching. Multiple engines, moving fast but trying to stay quiet. I positioned myself near the main garage door, holding the Swiss Army knife in my right hand. Not much of a weapon, but better than nothing. The children were hidden in the old office, crouched behind the metal desk with instructions to stay silent, no matter what they heard. But it wasn't Patterson who came through the door. It was Detective Kowalski, followed by 6 officers in tactical gear, moving with the coordinated precision of a SWAT team entry. They'd found us. Clear left, someone called out. Clear right. Johnson? Kowalski's voice echoed through the garage. Marcus Johnson, are you in here? Here, I called back, stepping into the light with my hands raised. The children are safe. They're in the office. The relief on Kowalski's face was visible even from across the room. Jesus Christ, we thought we were going to find bodies. Patterson and his partner, no sign of them. But we've got roadblocks up all over the south side, and the FBI is coordinating with other jurisdictions. If they try to run, we'll get them. One of the tactical officers emerged from the office leading Maria, Deshawn, and Keisha. All three children were crying now, but they were alive and moving under their own power. In a few hours, they'd be back with their families. How did you find us? I asked. Your phone call gave us a general area, and we've been canvassing every industrial building within a 5-mile radius since 4 a.m. Plus, we got a break from the surveillance footage at Murphy Elementary. One of the cameras caught Patterson's license plate when he was using the fake police car. Fake police car? Stolen from a Chicago PD impound lot 6 months ago. He's been driving around in it, conducting traffic stops. The whole 9 yards. We're still trying to figure out how many crimes he might have committed while impersonating an officer. I looked around the garage at the abandoned surveillance equipment, the children's clothing, the maps marked with red pins indicating potential targets. This is bigger than just Chicago. Ray, he mentioned operations in other cities, buyers who pay for specific types of children. I know. We've already contacted the FBI's Crimes Against Children unit, and they're reviewing similar cases from Boston, Pittsburgh, Denver. This could be the break we need to shut down an entire network. But even as I felt relief at the children's rescue, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd only caught a glimpse of something much larger and more organized. Patterson and his partner had escaped, which meant they were probably already implementing contingency plans, moving to new cities, establishing new identities. And somewhere else in America, children were walking home from school past white vans with unknown figures watching from behind. Masks that looked almost but not quite like faces from television. Epilogue, November 15th, 1991. Detective Kowalski brought me the final police reports 3 weeks after the rescue. Patterson and his partner had vanished completely, despite a nationwide manhunt involving local police, state investigators, and federal agents. The stolen police car was found abandoned in Gary, Indiana, but there was no trace of where they'd gone after that. The FBI thinks they had multiple identities prepared, Kowalski explained. Sitting in my living room with a cup of coffee and a stack of case files. Fake IDs, cash reserves, safe houses in other states. This wasn't their first operation, and it probably wasn't going to be their last. The investigation had revealed connections to similar incidents in 7 other cities over the past decade. Always the same pattern. Mass hysteria about clown sightings. Children reporting encounters with mysterious figures. Then a small number of disappearances that were initially classified as runaways or family abductions. Most of those children were never found. But we got Maria, Deshawn, and Keisha back, I said. That has to count for something. It counts for everything. And Marcus, you should know, the kids are doing well. They're getting counseling. Their families are getting support. And they're all back in school. Maria's teacher says she's been writing stories about her experience. Her way of processing what happened. What kind of stories? Stories where the children outsmart the monsters. Stories where the teachers save the day. Stories where everything works out in the end. I smiled for the first time in weeks. Children were remarkably resilient. I'd learned over my years of teaching. They could survive trauma that would break adults, as long as they had support and understanding, and the knowledge that they were valued and protected. The Chicago Clown sighting stopped completely after Patterson's operation was exposed. The mass hysteria faded as quickly as it had begun, leaving behind only police reports and newspaper clippings and the memories of a city that had briefly convinced itself that monsters were real and active and hunting in broad daylight. But the monsters had been real. They just hadn't looked like clowns. I still have those police reports, filed away in my desk drawer beneath stacks of ungraded tests and lesson plans. Sometimes I read through them, remembering that October when an entire city's fear was used as a weapon against its most vulnerable members. Remembering how close we came to losing 3 children to predators who understood that the best camouflage isn't a mask. It's the authority of a uniform and the chaos of mass panic. John Wayne. Gacy was executed by lethal injection on May 10th, 1994. By then, I was married to Linda again. We'd reconciled after the rescue, both of us understanding that life is too short and too precious to waste on old fears. We had our first child, a daughter, in 1995. I never told her about the white van or the man who pretended to be a police officer, but I made sure she knew how to recognize real authority from fake, how to trust her instincts when adults made her uncomfortable, how to scream loud enough to bring help running, because the monsters are still out there, somewhere wearing new faces and telling new lies and waiting for the next opportunity to exploit our fears. But so are the teachers and the detectives, and the parents who refuse to let them win.